In theaters now from director Jane Schoenbrun is the very A24 release I Saw the TV Glow, starring Justice Smith and Brigette, Lundy-Paine, and Fred Durst, who I had no idea. I don't really care about Fred Durst. I just know the name and I know that he was in a band and all that, and I had no idea that he played one of the characters in this film. So here's the deal. I don't know if you know what A24 means. What A24 means to me and a lot of people I know is that it's an indie studio that puts out really interesting, really outside the box stuff. Sometimes it's really good and sometimes it's very annoyingly A24. And this film maybe leans, for me, the pendulum swings a little bit more toward the annoyingly A24. I had seen the director's previous film called We're All Going to the World's Fair, which is a very odd, very quirky, very fascinating horror psychological thriller indie film. So I was very curious about this. I'd seen the trailers and I really wasn't kind of sold on whether I wanted to see this or not, but I had time and I have AMC A-list and I figured, hey, what the heck, let's get in out of the hot. So I didn't go in with arms crossed. I went in hoping, I had friends say they really enjoyed this. So I went in with kind of no expectations, curious as to what I would get, and what I got was partly successful for me. So the deal here is this. Two people meet when they're young. I think it's high school, or one person's maybe in high school and one's on the cusp of going into high school. So it's a young boy and a quirky kind of edgy goth girl or outsider girl, and they bond over this show called The Pink Opaque, which is some kind of early 2000s. This is set in the past, late 90s, early 2000s. It's some kind of young adult Buffy style TV shows. I'm sure there are more shows that I don't know about from that era because I didn't care in that era. I wasn't a kid. This is more like, but they bond over this show about these two girls who have a psychic bond and they're trying to fight some evil force that's going to take over the world or something like that. So the young boy is very much an outsider, very quirky. He doesn't really fit in, but I think he sees through this girl a friend and a kindred spirit, and he hops on her bandwagon of being obsessed with this show, and through that they form a bond. And then eventually one day she just disappears. I'm not going to tell you the whole story. Eventually one day she just disappears and her TV is found burning in the backyard, and nobody knows what happened to her, and life goes on. So this movie kind of bops back around. Justice Smith plays the boy in this scenario, and Brigette Lundy-Paine is the girl. And he's sort of, you see him kind of growing older and trying to find his way in the world. It's a very tight film. It's very tight in terms of, it's a very contained world that we look at. We don't see a lot of characters. We don't see a lot of people. We really just see up close and personal this boy who lives with his mother and father, and it's this girl whose parents we never see, but we know they fight a lot, and she hangs out in the basement where the TV is. And it's this very outsider, preteen, teen, young adult, coming of age kind of story that isn't really odd or supernatural or anything until a bit farther into the film. And again, I don't want to give away too much about this, but what I'll say is the girl eventually shows up many years later, I guess 8 years later, where this guy's now a young adult. He's working, he's got a job. She shows up again and she says, I'm going to tell you why I went away. Maybe that show wasn't fake. Maybe we live in the reality of the show. And then all kinds of questions start coming up, most of which are not answered. Now, sometimes I'm cool with that in a film. Sometimes I'm cool with trying to have my own interpretation or things not being answered, so it's a mystery and it's fascinating. Here, it just didn't make a lot of sense. Film was visually interesting and it held my interest up to a point, and then it just kind of did some weird things and ended. And I was just like, okay, that's great. I guess I got to go read somewhere now about what this was about and what that was, because I guess I'm not smart enough to figure it out myself. I know the director is a trans individual, and a lot of people have said this is either an allegory or this speaks to the trans experience, and I can, not being a trans person, I can see that to a degree here and there, but not knowing that world and not knowing what the cues, the codes, or the allegories are here, some of it flat out just didn't make sense to me. Some of it just felt like weird for weird's sake, and in the end, I really didn't like it. So, I mean, I don't want to say that. That's not true. It's not that I really didn't like it. In the end, I didn't care for it, which is a shame because I was kind of with its vibe and its flow up to a point. and then it just got like I said, it just got weird, and then it just stopped. And that's a very A24, that's a very art house indie thing, is to have a movie going and then suddenly it cuts to black and it's credits and you're like, so I guess it's over now? One thing it did really, really well, it did several things very well, but one thing it did really, really well was the recreation of that early 2000s young adult TV show. If you had just shown me those clips and said, oh yeah, this is some show from back then, I would have been like, yep, that looks like a show from back then. Like, it was so accurately done. It was very impressive that they were able to recreate a show from that period. From what I remember of it, I mean, I would have looked at that clip, as I said, if you gave it to me out of context, I would have looked at that clip and gone, yep, that looks just like a show back then, and every reason why I wouldn't have watched a show back then. I just didn't like the aesthetic of that era. So now that it's becoming nostalgic and it's coming back, I'm just like, yeah, I still don't like the aesthetic of that era, but I will say that it was incredibly well rendered and recreated. So your mileage may vary. A lot of people really like this film. It's see it in a theater if you can. It's got some really interesting imagery, some really creepy imagery that will work better on the big screen than on the small. And as I always say, I want theaters to survive. So please go to the movies so that I can keep going to the movies. In theaters now from A24, I Saw the TV Glow.